Hi, everybody, and welcome to the Lead Podcast. So excited for today's episode. And our purpose is to empower the next generation of hospitality industry leaders. Before we kick off, I'm going to introduce Amy. Amy, welcome to our episode. And
Thank
please
you.
introduce our guest today.
Super excited. A very special day. We've got the fabulous and famous celebrity Helen Lao in the house. She is the founder and president of ClearPass. Everyone's heard of her. She's an executive search, executive matchmaker. And if you don't follow her, make sure you do on hashtag Helen on the Move. We're so happy to have you today, Helen.
Oh, thank you so much. It's a pleasure, Matt. Thanks for having me. And Amy, always. You can never say no to Amy Hom.
And Helen, I want to jump right in here and try to create some context for the listener. If they're going to stick with us for the next 20, 30 minutes. But to start up front, what's the number one lesson that you've learned when it comes to attracting and retaining top talent?
It's interesting. We always say this as a team, that job descriptions all look the same. The truth is resumes look the same. When we talk about culture, we spend a lot of time on the front end with our clients, really trying to understand not just what their existing team looks like, but also, a lot of people put a lot of values, visions, missions up on the wall, and sometimes those don't always match, right? And so I think our team spends a lot of time on the front end, really trying to understand. So in our worlds, we'll get a specific mandate that says we're looking for this operator who brings these 25 things, and it's usually a unicorn, and they're looking for all these different pieces. But what's most important is actually starting with what is it that is a perfect match for your brand. And it's taking a lot of time on the front end to understand what that culture is. That is so important. And I believe that every brand looks different, and which is why all the job descriptions look the same, which is why it's important to dig deeper and look beyond the, kind of peeling back the onion.
That's so interesting. Yeah. Go ahead, Matt.
No, one thing we've always done with our clients for years is we take their job descriptions and we take the logos of the brands off and we ask them to find their own. It's a really frightening exercise at times. So we've done that for years because they do sound and look the same. So I'm so excited to hear more from you on how do we create a different process to develop a different result. But before I turn it back to Amy, Helen, do you mind introducing yourself and just telling the audience a little bit about your story?
Yeah, thanks. Yes, I've actually been in recruiting for, 30 years. Started my career out in corporate America, spent 15 years, always in HR recruiting, some facet of recruiting. About 15 years ago, I decided to go out on my own. It was a big leap, a scary leap, but I decided to take the entrepreneurial journey and have not looked back. Been very, very fortunate to have worked in a lot of different industries, but I will tell you, restaurants, retail, consumer, it's what my passion is. It's the most dynamic. I've been in engineering, and that was not, it was just not a good match for me. Yeah. So I can tell you that I love this industry very, very much. And so being able to serve it is an honor for me.
I love it.
I do love that. Something you mentioned earlier on the values. How do you find, especially in your role, somebody? I know there's a lot. Everyone wants a unicorn, but how do you how important is it for the emerging leaders that are listening in, for them to find a place that is all about the culture that they want and the values that they believe in?
Yeah, I think, everyone, it's interesting and it's very cliche. I hear a lot of the same answers. Look, it's got to be a great culture. But when you really start digging deeper, it's like it means something different to everyone. And I'll use one example. Everyone defines success differently. And so, when we talk about growth and when we talk to hundreds of leaders a week. And when we start talking about success and values, and you start asking the right questions and digging a little bit deeper, you find it sounds very different. Some people, it's about title. Some people, it's about compensation because they have a family. Some people, it's just really about organization, size of business, scope of responsibility. So actually, when people say values, it's actually unique to the person. And so I think where our team does a really good job is understanding what value means to the person and making sure we're matching that with the right client. Because, it's not just a one size fits all, because we can say this company has an incredible culture, but they're missing things that are actually very important to the individual we're talking to.
Love that so much. And when it comes to, somebody revisiting, so sometimes we'll talk about the emerging leader looking for a role, but just to go a little bit deeper on that question, what can a brand do, a company do, a restaurant do to kind of just pause for a minute? And, do they go around defining culture for themselves? Like, can we go a little bit deeper? What the leader inside the restaurant could do right now to answer some of those critical questions you just talked to?
Yeah, I think that culture, taking a look at what the offerings are that you're, because it's so competitive, right? So, what is the differentiator in the
Yeah.
brand? As you talked about before, you look at the job descriptions, you remove the name, and they're trying to find their own job description. That is a scary exercise, by the way.
It is, yeah.
And a lot of it looks the same on paper, right? So the question is, what is the differentiator? I mean, and one thing I respect so much about Amy is she's taken such a leadership role in the places she's been, where people view her as somebody and I'm not saying this because she's on here, it's true. There's so many people that would say that Amy Hom has been a mentor in their career. And it's because she's gone out of her way within any organization to help define what that culture looks like. So, it's interesting because I don't always think it's the brand. For the brand, it's about the leadership team and like how committed are they to culture. And so I had one group who said, well, Helen, we need this HR leader. We need this person because they define, like, we need definition of culture. And I was like, that is such the wrong way to look at it, because no one person defines culture of an organization, right? I mean, it is the leadership's commitment to whatever, like, doing what you say you're going to do, delivering the promises that you're offering, and not just in the courting stage, but rather throughout their entire journey within the organization.
I love it. And thank you. Sorry, Amy, I have to highlight this because I love when Amy gets feedback, because I read body language for a living as a coach. And I really appreciate you, Helen, sharing some feedback on Amy.
True.
So I think she's changing the industry. I also saw her shift in her seat there a bit to see how Amy likes recognition, which is really nice. But I hope you hear that, Amy, because
Not well.
I know.
Thank
Don't worry.
you.
I saw it. I saw the body
Moving on.
Moving on.
But she lives it. She lives
Thank
it.
you, Helen. Thank you.
Yeah. And one thing I was going to share, because we could write culture on a wall, but we can see culture inside of a team or inside of a restaurant. And I think the both of you bring that forward in your brands and your teams, where you can feel it and see it. But one thing we'd like to do, because sometimes we talk about the success and the process, but sometimes we learn that through story. Is there something in your experience in the last 30 years, especially last 15 years as an entrepreneur, where you learned a lesson around attracting, something that just shifted your mindset and then started to shift the results that you saw in relation to just attracting the right people?
Yeah, I think we become an extension of the brands that we serve. So, we find ourselves a little bit like as I mentioned, we spend a lot of time on the front end getting to really know the brand, the DNA, like what's been successful, what types of skill sets have been successful within your organization. That actually truly, when they're able to define that and tell me
I love
what
that.
it is, like it really helps us know, so we're able to go out and find the right match. I think a piece of advice that I would give to emerging leaders is that when you're starting out in your career, again, depending on what the person's looking for, the grass is not always greener on the other side. And this would be like a message that I would send, like if I had a whole room full of emerging leaders, is that sometimes being able to be great at where you're at, and that having some tenure in your career is a good thing. I've had several people, a lot of people will call me, and sometimes it's just to bounce, hey, Helen, can I ask you this? I had one very specific example, very high level executive drive down to have lunch with me. And his question to me was, Helen, like, am I missing out on these opportunities? I'm watching people like miss, am I missing out on this? And, we had a long lunch, and I asked a lot of questions, and I said, look, my best advice to you is to stay where you are. And I remember he was like, I think I just needed to hear you say that. And he's been there exactly where he's at, doing amazing, gotten promoted several times, and he's exactly where he belongs. And so sometimes I think we're always looking for the next best thing, or we think the next best move, without always like asking all the right questions. And we see that a lot. So for emerging leaders, it's like, do your best work. Do your best work where you're at, because the grass is not greener on the other side.
That is such a powerful response for us all to hear, and any leader in the industry, no matter where they're at. Amy, I'll let you lead from here.
No, I think that that's amazing. I think if you find a brand that aligns with your values, you're in. And then if you find a leadership team that is into and investing in and developing you. But even this morning, I had a conversation with a young woman that wanted some mentoring, and she's taking a job that she's not so excited about. And she said, no one's showing up on the calls. They're just emailing me and all these things. And I said, well, what if you're the change agent? What if you go in there, you've accepted this role, so you've already said yes, so now how do you become the person that actually can influence the culture a little bit? And she said, well, I tried it in my last job, it didn't work. I said, but that doesn't mean it's not going to work this time.
Yeah.
And so Helen, do you ever find that, especially with emerging leaders, they'll say my regional director doesn't develop me or whatnot, but I always tell them there's a plethora of all of us that will help you. If it's not the direct supervisor, sometimes they're newly promoted into their role. They don't know how to get you where you want to go yet. So using things like Lead and reaching out to Gleam and all the things that are out there that are kind of, free services per se to help you, I think are important. But I don't know what you would say to that young woman, but I also love to hear how you feel about mentorship and how people present you or say about you when you're not in the room is equally important.
Yeah, Amy, I would tell you this, that I think the ownership around development is actually owned by both the person and then also a mentor, right? No one's going to be able, there's no silver bullet is what I would say. And when I think about individuals is like, what can you personally do to help continue your growth? I mean, and I love Lead and Gleam and all of that. Those are resources that are part of your journey, but it's not the answer to your journey. Like, you actually have to look internally to say, what is it that I would like to see? And honestly, like, I'm sure there's a lot of women that look at you, Amy, and say, like, I want to be there. Like, I want to get there. Right. But it doesn't mean, Amy, you're going to, like, your path is their journey. So I do think that people need to really kind of, reflect on what's important to them and what are the things. I love the example of that person being the change agent, because, if they change that mindset, it's not about other people getting you there. It's about what can you do so that it's a different experience for somebody else.
Mm-hmm. I agree.
And just as part of like the process, this is kind of the note-taking section or the listening. If you're in your car, I would go back and listen to that 1 minute, because what it did for me is it reverses the accountability. It says, what do we own in our experience, whether it's starting a new role or in our search or in our engagement, no matter what size, if you're hiring or looking for a new opportunity. What Helen and Amy just shared there is just so brilliant to pause. And one thing I was coached on years ago, how do we take our power back? How do we own our power and our roles? And there are, it's fluid and it changes, but how do we move forward to what works best for our team or at times for our next development opportunity? The one thing that I wanted, the three of us were just recently at RLC. And one of the things I heard, there's a lot of information there, but I heard there is really a shift from, the term of attraction to the fight or the opportunity for retention. So as some of the trends shift, when it looks to what we see ahead for us in respects to retention, Helen, what is your kind of vision or insight for the industry moving forward, and how does either a leader that's employing right now retain their people, or how does somebody take ownership of their own experience?
Yeah, I think that, the retention piece has always been a question in our industry, right? It's a high turnover industry. I think the groups that have done it best have brought employees in as part of that conversation. And because it's not always like, hey, we can sit here and say, hey, this is what we're going to offer. This is what we're going to do for them. But the truth is, like, really understanding from an employee's perspective. And today it's shifted. I will tell you, having young children who are in the workforce today, there are moments I'm like, goodness, it's difficult for me to say, like, you just got to work harder, and so different things are important to them today that aren't necessarily or weren't to us. But I do think that the employee needs to be a part of that as well. And look, it's very competitive out there right now. We have, like I said, we're fielding hundreds of calls a week, inbound calls of people that are either fearful of losing their job or believe they're going to lose their job or have been out of a job for a very long time. And so it's really, really competitive. I think for brands now more than ever is to put your arms around your greatest talent, let them know, recognize, right, that they are a big part of your business, because without them, there is no business. And so never losing sight of that. I think that recognizing employees, and people like recognition in different ways, but making sure that's happening every day.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think celebrating and recognizing is a big piece, even if it's a small win. It's celebrating those along the way. We have a celebrations chat, and I was just laughing this weekend because they're all posting crazy photos. People peroning at bars, like all the things. But I love that they're all engaging across the country with one another, and I think it's super important to create those communities. It does. I do think, to your point, Helen, with I have the two kids as well, and the way that they work and the way they think, it's just so different than the way I grew up. And I'm like, you need to have a little bit more grit. Like this isn't like you get to throw in the towel. Fight, and then also pick the companies that you do want to work for, write them down and start going after that. Cause I've learned a lot of mistakes along my way. And, not that I would do anything different, but sometimes I'm like, I could have pivoted a little bit, in a different path there. But at the end of the day, we're all where we're supposed to be for a reason. And I think I agree with you also that the grass is not always green on the other side, as long as your values are intact. I do think owning your own development is important. If you had to, just to pivot for a minute here, if you would just ask like 2 or 3 questions to a candidate, what would those be? What are the most important ones? If I'm a manager or a GM or a regional director, I know you do executive level, but just coming up through the industry, are there some key things that you think are super important to know about that person during the process?
Yeah, my first question is, why are we talking? Like, what's missing? Like, there's obviously something missing where you currently are. Otherwise, you wouldn't be calling us. You would not reply to an ad. You wouldn't be proactively, like, there is something missing where you currently are, and really understanding whether or not that is something your organization provides, because that's where I kind of go back to. Sometimes we make these jumps and maybe it's a little bit more money, but that's where, like, if I've heard it once, I've heard it 10,000 times that it's not all about the money, and that doesn't change. That doesn't change anything at the end. It really doesn't. That ends up falling at the bottom in terms of level of importance. Even if they're young and hungry and they think that that's what it's about, they quickly learn that it falls to the bottom pretty quickly. The second one is, as you're thinking about, and I always do ask this, like, give me your definition of success, because like I can sit here and my definition is completely different than what yours is, because we're in different stages of life, right? So what is important? Like, I spoke to somebody and they said, Helen, like, I still have 2 kids to go to college and I need to keep working. This is not, I'm not able to retire yet at this point. If it's somebody coming up and they're just getting started, take the time to learn everything you can in your current job. I was recently, I'll even give a shout out to this. I was at the stand and I was there with my son, and I watched the management team there. It was probably 7:30. It was after basketball. And I watched this young lady, and her team, everybody was moving. There wasn't a lot of guests at that point in time. Everybody was moving this young man. It was raining out. He was out there wiping down the window, like the doors as you were coming in. Everybody was doing something, right? And so I was so impressed by that. I went up, I could clearly tell at the beginning, I couldn't tell, but at the end, I could tell she was the manager. They would be coming up asking, what else can I do? And to me, I was like, you know what? I bet you people love working for her. There was clear guidance. People knew, like, we're not standing around, we're not talking, even if there aren't a lot of guests there, but it really stuck out to me. And I was so impressed. And the restaurant looked clean. Like, it looked great. It was sharp. And it took all those folks. And I was like, it sounds really simple, but it's not, because you go into sometimes you'll go into a restaurant and there's 6 people sitting around talking because maybe it's not busy. But I think about those people who are like, they want to be in this industry. They want to continue to grow in this industry. They should want to emulate that manager. She was fantastic.
Motivating and inspiring leadership. That's what everybody wants. And and the team will do whatever they need to make sure that you're successful. That's great. I love those questions.
Yeah.
And these are such, everybody listening on both sides, there's two great questions there. Why are we talking? And one thing I do is I watch leadership when it happens in the moment, but Helen's tone when she delivered that question, I know was completely intentional. It was strong. It's something she expects an answer at her level if she's going to provide her time. Don't want to speak for you, Helen, but that's what I observed here. And what I take from that is let's take time to really answer these questions ourselves rather than just search. Or what does success look like? I just had a chance to work with 120 leaders this weekend over 2 days. And I said, you need to demand to be able to go to your employers and ask, how am I successful in my role? You have that opportunity to own and ask that question. And to see it change reframe the dynamic in the relationship. Those are two brilliant questions that first we have to ask ourselves and be prepared to answer, and then be confident in the delivery of the answer.
Yeah, Matt, I do think one, going back to something Amy asked earlier, like I do think it's the employer's responsibility to provide the feedback. I mean, I think, there's, I'm thinking of another conversation this week where the person was very uneasy and uncomfortable because they weren't certain. There were a lot of changes happening within the organization. And I think the most, it's when things are unstable and there's not transparency is when people get the most nervous, because they're wondering, like, what does this mean for me? And will I have do I still have a job? Am I next? And so I think when communication's not happening or feedback's not given, I mean, that is owned by the company. And so, I mean, otherwise, in times of uncertainty, people will start looking. Because what they don't want to do is be stuck without a job, and I heard that loud and clear from this one individual who was very, very concerned. But that happens, like the company owns the feedback to the employees.
Yeah, I think it's brilliant. I just went through that with a large multi-site operator. They have a few hundred locations last week. And I said, what was successful when people were uncertain last? And it was the pandemic. So I said, now we have to go back and communicate so people have certainty. Can you share a little bit more of how does somebody create certainty? So that's something you're getting the question from the person calling, looking for opportunity. But when you speak to people, and my perception is you're really coaching them on their next opportunity, whether it's staying or going. How do you reinforce certainty with somebody who's reaching out? Because a lot of us, as you showed earlier, sometimes the grass is green where we are.
Yeah. I do think that, I have coached people before to say, you should give your employer an opportunity to do the right thing. And so it's one thing if you don't voice it and you're sitting there wondering and you feel like it's not transparent, but you should actually give the company the opportunity. There's 1,000 things going on at any given time. And, your issue seems like it's the most important when there's 1,000 other issues, right? So give the employer the opportunity to do.
So true.
And, I always say that. I was like, I know that person didn't call you back, but it's not their top priority. So give them the benefit of the doubt and, reach out to them or, ask them for feedback. If you're still not getting clarity and you're feeling uneasy about that, then it's probably not the wrong thing for you to be looking, because it's sometimes what's not spoken. So.
One of the things I got to add on there, and I think I've said it before, Matt, on another podcast, was you get the feedback, but what you do with it is even more important. And I remember driving with the famous Steve Carley in the car, and I said, why is it that some people get promoted and some stay in their role? And he said, Amy, I'm with you because you can take, like, if you can take feedback, I'll invest in you all day long. But if you can't, you're going to stay at the same level in your career that you're at, because you're never going to actually think you need to perform better. And I have, we all have some on our team that can and can't take it as well. And not all feedback is great for sure, but somebody's investing in you and giving the time. So I think that's important. So I love that Helen pointed that out.
I love all of the conversation. Now, what we want to do, just in respect to our learning here at Lead and the intention of this, of the podcast series, is to give people tactical takeaways that they can act on inside their operation. So when it comes to selection, so maybe somebody selecting their next employer or working through a variety of candidates so they have the right match, not just the right fit. What is one process, Helen, that you would recommend, that they kind of one thing that if they tweaked or changed, would improve their results?
I think that the advice that I've given many times is when you're thinking about, if you're about to make a move, is, have you created a target list of brands that you respect, admire, versus just the worst thing you could possibly do is go on Indeed and start looking and applying to every job. And, I mean, that is really not, that's not a thoughtful, it's not a strategic approach. I think that if somebody's looking for their next opportunity, again, they should ask themselves first, what's missing where I am? If you start there, then, kind of saying, hey, I don't know this to be true, but these are brands that from the outside I look at and I admire. Like I see them, very active with their people. There's different things, but people should take a moment and actually target searches, versus kind of just applying to everything. There's one example that I do want to give. It was a high-level executive who said, Helen, will you talk to my son? And my son's graduating. And I was like, I would love to. I would love to speak with him. So I got on the phone and he's like, well, my dad says that I need a recruiter. And so like, he wanted me to get in touch with you. And I started laughing. And this is somebody I have a great deal of respect for. And I said, that's actually really not great advice, so let me start with why. But listen, I mean, he was actually a D1 athlete. He had so many things going for him, right? I said, what are brands that you love? And he named 5 brands off the top of his head. I said, so here's my advice to you. I said, you have a profile on LinkedIn. I saw it. I said, you know what I would do? I would directly email that company and tell them how passionate you are about their product. And I said, I would actually send them no response. You may get no response, but you're doing something proactively that most people are sitting around applying to a job and hoping that somebody calls them back. You're taking that one extra step. You are a user of their product and you're passionate about it. Tell them that story. And I remember he got off the phone. I said, so sorry, you can tell your dad that his advice that I went against what his advice was, but I really believe my advice will work better for you, So, but those are just like little things that I think we're conditioned, or we train folks to think, oh, like go out there, apply to 5 jobs a day, do this, like that. That's actually not the best advice. The best advice is to be intentional about it and think about what it is, what type of brand you want, and then like setting a goal of what is that? Where do I want to be? Not just a year from now, not like I just want to get promoted to general manager or area manager. It's really thinking about like what. And by the way, you learn something good or bad where you're at, and that's the other thing I say is it's not always going to be good, but you still learn something, even if it's really bad.
Mm-hmm.
I love it.
So well said.
There's an opportunity here for those listening. There's been so many points shared, but you're going to need to execute on them, right? So who's going to go out there and find the brands that they desire and send those emails? Because you have a world leader, Helen, sharing this with us. And Amy shared a similar message earlier in this episode to say, if you do this, get clarity for yourself, move forward with intention. That word intention, this lands so much for me, but you got to act. Last question that I wanted to go through today is just revisiting retention strategies. So what can leaders do right now to have a people-focused strategy or to really double down on retaining the people that they have?
I think what was, we talked a little bit about our kids, Amy, and like the work ethic today looks different. We can call it work ethic, but the truth is it's just reframed, right? For them, the things that were important to us or maybe what got us ahead looks different today. I have living proof of that, what's important to them right today is balance. What's important today to them is being able to have mental health and being able to take the time away. And when I'm away, I'm actually away. I'm taking real life examples from my own children. So, it's like, no, actually, if I'm gone on vacation for 3 days, I'm not bringing my laptop. And that is so counter to what I would ever do,
Mm-hmm.
So I think it's really understanding this next generation, what's important to them is different. So we can sit here and guess at all these different benefits that they want. And but that's not going to help you retain people. It's benefits that we think that they want. But that's, again, where it becomes collaborative is like, what is important? Like, let's brainstorm. Running a restaurant business, you can't work hybrid, you can't work remote, you can't do that, right? So, but is there a solution in there that would allow, maybe it's not the traditional way we've always looked at it. Is that in there? Maybe the employees actually could give you some good ideas. And if you really want to retain folks and they see you execute on something like that, I promise you're ahead.
I am That is so well said, because they have the answers. They know what they want. And it's having enough emotional intelligence and EQ to go ask them and listen to it and actually do something about it. I agree. To your point, Matt, you're saying we all need to act on our careers. We need to act on what our team members want in the field as well.
Great.
It's funny, as we wrap this episode, what I just wrote, and I don't usually take notes in the middle of an episode. So if you see me writing, that's what I'm doing. I just wrote down, ask them.
Yeah.
Right. So if you want to know what's happening with your people, we can make assumptions with the best of intentions. But you have an opportunity of, if you have any level of staff from 5 to 500 or 5,000, ask them. You'll see patterns, leverage the patterns, and you'll improve your retention. Helen, I want to thank you so much for taking the time to spend with us today.
Thank you so much. That was amazing. Thank you.
It's wonderful, wonderful to be on. And thank you so much. It was wonderful to see you both.
Thank you. Thanks.